Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the speculation that Boris Johnson is not so much flipping a coin about his Brexit decision of whether to go for a deal or a no deal, as letting the United States do it for him. A number of officials and ministers in Europe are reported to be of the belief that Boris Johnson intends to let the American people decide whether he should have a Brexit deal or not. That's nice, isn't it? It's going to give them a referendum on it, not us. It's dependent upon who wins the presidential election next week. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, first thing, obviously, I need to point out is that very few people will genuinely know what Boris Johnson intends to do or is thinking of intending to do regarding a Brexit deal with the EU. Politically, there are pros and cons to a no deal as compared to his bare bones trade agreement. And all of his decisions are political and self-serving, and not all of his decisions are in the end in his interest. We know he's had to U-turn on a number of things, so that political decision making is not always spot on. But obviously the benefits of the country don't enter into it. So when discussing the way in which Boris Johnson may leap, or as in this video discussing the way others believe he will leap, it must be pointed out that it is of course speculation. The defining characteristic of Boris Johnson's time in power has been to centralise all decision making to a 1 metre radius around Dominic Cummings's desk. This means that even people who can claim to be close to Johnson, whether it be his friends, his top officials, even his own personally appointed cabinet ministers, don't necessarily really know much about his strategy until it's time to tell them to sell it to the party and the public. Even senior cabinet ministers have been frozen out of decision making. I don't think Michael Gove will be amongst that number in this particular case, though. In fact, it could well be argued that Michael Gove is having much more of a leaning to the decision making than Boris Johnson. But I was talking recently about a report that a close friend of Boris Johnson was convinced that the Prime Minister was constantly in two minds about what to do, leaning one way and then the other. I didn't rule it out, but I wasn't necessarily convinced. Now, there are reports in The Observer that Ivan Rogers, who was our former top official in the EU, has been talking to officials and ministers in Europe, and they are of the view that Boris Johnson is going to base his decision on who wins the US presidential election next week. If Trump wins, the thinking goes, then he will go for a no-deal Brexit. If Biden wins, then he won't risk it, and he'll take the bare-bones deal that is on offer. Obviously, there's still a few things to sort out there. Now, we'll have to bear in mind that even if we accept that these people are being honest, they are only speculating themselves. They are judging Johnson's actions and deciding what is the most likely explanation for it. You know, these guys are obviously involved directly in the negotiating process, and they're interpreting Johnson's current intransigence as waiting for a particular event or deadline, because time is ticking, you know. But I suppose we'll find out what's really happening towards the end of next week when the US election results take shape. It is an interesting notion, though, because after all, it does make a few things slot into place. Even though we're getting to the point where time will be running out to get any deal ratified, you know, for the end of the transition period, Johnson is still clearly playing for time. It seems odd at this point. You know, you could understand it for the rest of the year because he didn't really want to negotiate anyway. He just wanted to make it look like he'd stared out the EU until the last moment. But at this point really is when the movement should be happening, you know. So how else do you explain, for example, his pointless disruption to last week's talks? He wanted talks to intensify. He asked for talks to intensify. The EU said, yeah, all right then. And, you know, and that insistence of his that talks intensify suggested that he genuinely wanted a deal. And then he cancelled 3 days worth of talks last week. You know, his behaviour could be largely explained by the fact he's essentially made up his mind in what he's going to do, and he's just waiting for the American people to press the button. You know, I suppose there was still a niggling doubt in my mind when I thought of this. So I believe that he genuinely wants to deal with the EU, all other things considered. Even one that's tissue paper thin. In fact, the thinner the better. But of course, if Biden is to become president, it makes sense to get a deal with the EU. Because with Biden in the White House, Johnson is going to have to start paying much more attention to Ireland and in particular the needs of Northern Ireland. He's not really used to that. But it's the only way he's going to get his precious US trade deal, of course, with Biden as president. Now, if Trump wins, you say, what then? Johnson still can't abandon the bits of the Northern Ireland Protocol that he doesn't like. We mustn't forget that although leading Democrats have been more vocal about the need to fully comply with the arrangements in place for Northern Ireland in the withdrawal agreement, Republicans have made this point as well. They have been in on it. In fact, Trump's own people have said as much. So it wouldn't... The difference between a Trump presidency and a Biden presidency has got nothing to do with the Northern Ireland Protocol. We are going to have to comply with that come what may if we want a US trade deal. That is all there is to it. There isn't a difference between the two presidents from that point of view. So then that brings me... So again, if you assume that this is correct and you assume that Boris Johnson genuinely is waiting to see who wins, then you think, so what is the difference between the two? And then I was brought back to last year and what Trump's administration were clearly saying last year. So we saw from leaked documents about a year ago that were records of the secret talks that were taking place between the UK and US officials. The US was making it clear that we would not get a trade deal if we arranged an EU one. And these leaked documents, because these were British documents, not US documents, and they made it clear that UK officials were of the view that we believed them. We weren't in any doubt whatsoever that there will be no US trade deal if we get an EU trade deal. So that seems to me to be the most likely explanation, and one that, you know, does make certain things slot into place, does give credibility to the notion that Johnson is waiting to see. You know, like I've said, I think Johnson genuinely wants a deal, not a good one. He actively doesn't want a good one. It's not just that he doesn't care about a good one. He doesn't want a good one. He wants one that will just let him say he's got a deal. He promised a deal. There's a certain amount of subjectivity in what makes a good deal anyway. So he can claim that it's the great deal he promised, regardless of what it is. Just so long as it's a piece of paper that he can call a deal. That's all he needs. So if he's waiting on the US election result, that makes sense. He'd prefer a bare bones deal, but Trump won't talk to him if he gets any sort of deal with the EU. So he's waiting to see if Biden wins. You know, there has been a lot of suggestion that Boris Johnson, before now, would prefer a Biden victory. And again, that makes sense too. If Biden wins, at that point, he can miraculously announce a deal next Thursday or Friday by basically giving in to everything the EU are demanding. And that, I mean, that's getting to be the last possible moment anyway. Because Biden, of course, would not be opposed to the UK having both an EU and a US deal. But he'd presumably welcome the certainty, in fact, that it gives to Northern Ireland. Not that he'd necessarily rush into prioritising a deal with the UK. We have to remember he was vice president when President Obama said that the UK would be the back of a queue for a US trade deal. Biden may be of the same view. But at least there'd be no fatal barriers to it. At some point, we could arrange a trade deal, even if it's in years' time. There'd be no real barriers to it. If Trump wins, however, then a deal with both the EU and the US are mutually exclusive. Assuming Trump hasn't changed his mind since last year, or Putin hasn't changed his mind. However it works with him, I don't know, I get confused. So in the event of it looking like Trump is going to win, presumably, again, next Thursday or Friday, Johnson will suddenly start complaining that the EU are being difficult about this, that or the other, and say, well, I've tried, there's no way to break the impasse. No deal Brexit it is. Sorry everyone, I tried, I was perfectly reasonable, but the EU are just being so unfair, the sort of thing. So an awful lot of things do slot in place here. This is certainly credible. It is speculation, like I say, we don't know anything. We're not getting this from someone who is close to Boris Johnson himself, only those who are close to the negotiating process, imagining, what would explain it, and this would explain it. It does make sense. There is that difference when it comes to an EU trade deal, getting a US trade deal. We have to comply with the Northern Ireland Protocol either way, but getting an EU deal does mean that Trump has said no to a US deal, whereas Biden has not. And again, if you sort of believe, as I do, that Boris Johnson genuinely does want a deal, then that would make sense to me. Then we still have the issue of, even if Biden wins and Boris Johnson suddenly announces his deal at the last moment when he finds out that Biden's going to win, what will his backbenchers say to it? That's something we can't possibly judge until a deal is announced. But there it is. Interesting. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.